So now we're gonna get
All right.
into tonight's
The fun
Spectrum
stuff.
Pulse scanner anomaly. Hey, Pumpkin Fury, what's up, buddy? How you doing? Pumpkin Fury is the guy who has the man cavern uh, that we will
Wow.
be gaming
Hello.
in this Saturday. Yes, the man, the myth, the legend,
I heard you have
Greg.
a RV-sized hole in your man cave.
Yeah. So for this scanner anomaly, I wanted well, it's scanner anomaly because I initiated it, but it's a Spectrum Pulse because we're all talking about it across the spectrum. Um, and if you didn't catch it, I did a big long stream on Saturday night looking into all the lore surrounding regeneration. And there's a lot. It isn't just the Lore Maker's Guide to Regeneration. There's like five, there's multiple mentions across five Lore Makers community questions. There's like
Let's
four
let's put it this way.
fictional articles.
It's a
There's a lot.
game. There's two things that are the most common in every video. Doors and dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the cornerstone of video games. Arcade games, their entire business structure was make you die more and gate off as much as they can behind death
Mm-hmm.
because it makes you put in more quarters. In modern games, it's make a challenge to challenge your ability to use skills and puzzles and gate that way. I forget which SCL it was, but basically there was a dev that was on SCL that said talked about like the most synonymous thing is doors. But really, the two things of video games of pick any genre, any game, anywhere, the two things that are in it is death and doors.
Yep. And there's been a lot of confusion and controversy regarding medical gameplay in the last week or two since 323 went into PTO testing and then release, as well as with the sale of the Ursa Medevac, Ursa Rover Medevac variant.
Are you refusing
And
to use this nickname, or are you?
the NURSA, or well, so some people call it the NURSA because it's the nurse, uh, like nurse, and then other people call it the MRSA because it's the medical Ursa. So it's like pick one. It's six one half dozen. But there's a
I mean, I think Tyler used Nursa.
yeah. I think I like NURSA, but at the same time, MRSA works as well. Um, and the other thing, like in my profession, if it's a well-known thing that there are far more female nurses than there are male nurses. And so when you are working with a nurse who's a male, we call them a nurse. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I can see where you get the logic, but okay.
Yeah. So one of the core
So
things that
you're genderifying the which one it is. If it's a nurse, it's a female car. If it's a nurse, it's a male version. Like
mhm,
that actually makes a lot of sense because like different people want to call their vehicles different gender. Like that's a
yep.
thing.
Oh yeah. Mine is I don't genderize it. Dude is everything for me because I'm from NorCal. So when I had a leak in my sink and I was pissed off at it, I called it dude. What the hell? What the
Dave and
fuck?
Buster's is not an arcade. Don't even slander the entire name of an arcade.
Okay,
How
but
dare you?
continuing on, we got to keep
Yes.
going because we're already 2 hours in. We're just now
2
starting
hours
Spectrum
in.
Pulse.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of confusion surrounding what Star Citizen's medical gameplay is really all about and what it's meant to offer Star Citizen players. Because we really don't have a lot right now. It's really just providing medical support to the other people in your squad. And it's not like with mining and or salvage and such, where there is PVE content for medical. Your PVE content is you providing medical support to people doing PVE combat, and so there it's kind of limited. And because a lot of people play solo, they don't use the medical system other than on themselves. There's not much in the way of player to player interaction with the medical system other than when you're playing playing with your squad. But it's not meant to be that way. And so I wanted to go over a few things to really put medical gameplay into perspective, as well as give context for why people are upset about the NERSA or MRSA commercial, in terms of medical, why they're concerned about the future of medical gameplay, as well as some things to keep an eye on in terms of what to expect for the future of medical gameplay, and where it's going, what we might have to, what Star Citizen might have to offer for people who want to play this, play the medical side. So this all starts really with the Death of a Spaceman article. And if you haven't read this, for the love of God, go back and read it. Because I kid you not, I was in a giant argument with a guy in Paul's YouTube comments about Death of a Spaceman. And you could tell he was arguing about it because he had watched videos about it, but he'd never actually read it. And it wasn't until I
what's
actually...
the acronym?
DOASM.
What's DOASM. So if you ever see that pop up, because I saw DOASM pop up over the last week, I'm like, what the heck is that? What? That's far above my pay grade. I have no idea what you're talking about. It was just Death of a Spaceman. It hit me, I think, earlier today. So if you ever see that, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the death mechanics.
Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that separates Star Citizen from a lot of games, especially shooter games, first-person combat games. Is a lot of games have a very rudimentary health system. You play Battlefield or Call of Duty. The what the medic does and what you do to heal yourself is very simple, and it relies much more heavily on a rapid respawn mechanic and death versus actual healing. There are very few games that actually have a much of a robust medical aspect, whether you're playing solo or playing with others. It's not really a common thing, and that was not something that Chris Roberts wanted for his game. He wanted for you to have to manage your character's health and well-being and take care of them, otherwise they wouldn't be able to function appropriately. He wanted death to have meaning. He didn't want it you to play it like a more arcade game like Call of Duty, which he specifically references. But that was one thing that would frustrate me, is like, this guy had very strong beliefs around Death of a Spaceman. And it's like, dude, you haven't read it. He's like, it doesn't say that. And I'm like, yeah, it does. It 100. He's like, no, you're just projecting. And I'm like, okay, copy paste. Since then, no more replies. But I'm like, you thought I was just making shit up? Like, it literally says these things, And so, the big concept of Death of a Spaceman is they want death to be meaningful. They don't want you to play the game and just run into a hail of bullets or take extreme risks without planning ahead, without weighing the consequences, without doing some weighing the consequences of those decisions. So I wanted to read this a little bit first to sort of preface that. And the other part is how death is handled. Because it isn't just a matter of you get shot and you go down and you actually die. That was never meant to be the way Star Citizen worked. And it wasn't until very recently where we got to the point where you are starting to die a little bit less in terms of the big die. What they wanted is for you to get shot, get injured, go down, and be that down state to be like the what we call in medicine sort of near unconscious, and then for when you essentially when you had backspace from the down state, you're not backspacing to death and suicide. You're just saying, okay, I have given up waiting for someone to come and rescue me. And then the idea was that it would simulate you didn't die, you just got down, you just went unconscious. Just like in real life with my job, I go rescue people who are unconscious all the time, and they don't wake up until hours or days later, if not if at all, but hours or days later, and they never even saw me. But someone called 911 on their behalf, and I showed up and I took care of them and kept them alive until they got to where they're going. And that's a core aspect of Star Citizen's design and has been since the beginning, and didn't just start with Death of a Spaceman and then die. It continued since then through regeneration. So let's read this real quick. When you venture out into space proper, you put your character at risk, but it will be a long-term one, not an immediate one. It isn't permadeath where in other games where once you die, you die and you start all over again. He wanted it isn't permadeath like that. You do have permadeath, but it's not in that first incidence of you going down after getting shot. I see each character you play having the ability to die. That's why it's in quotes, die multiple times before the character is finally put to rest. Think of this like lives in an old school arcade game. Science in the future is far more advanced than today. Medicine has the ability to bring people back from what would be considered dead in today's world. That is a core concept of the game. That's why when you go into that down state, you're not dead. When you backspace, you're not supposed to be backspacing into regeneration and respawn. It's because the mechanic isn't fleshed out yet. But what they want is for you to, either be revived on site or backspace and wake up in a clinic or a hospital somewhere as if you were rescued. If you lose a dogfight and your ship is going to blow, you have a few seconds to eject. And this is long before Maelstrom and all that, but this is what Maelstrom and resource management is all about. So that way your ship doesn't go instant kablooey and kill you, full on kill you, not just down you, kill you. But this was a concept that they've talked about long ago. Yeah, how often have those unconscious rescued soils themselves in real life? I think there's a lot of poop involved in the job of being a medic. Not really. When people die and go into cardiac arrest, a lot of the times they void themselves, or they do so shortly after we start pumping on their chest. But very few people actually poop themselves in my line of work. It does happen, just not super frequently. So, but if you manage to safely eject and someone doesn't blast your ejected avatar, you won't have even used a life. You'll end up at the last planet you docked on with the new ship courtesy of system-wide insurance. You'll have lost your cargo and any upgrades unless you manage to insure those and you were destroyed in a system with a risk at or below your insurance rating. If you don't manage to eject in time, or someone blasts your ejected character, which carries a harsh penalty if you do this in civilized space, you're badly charred and almost dead. Again, just like he talked about, he said die in quotes, and down here he says almost dead avatar is recovered and you wake up in a med bay. He's only mostly dead, and there's a big difference. Princess Bride, yeah? Yeah, I'm including that. I'm working on a video that's about 10 minutes long surrounding all this stuff and how to fix it. So expect to see that on my YouTube in the next few days because I got a lot of it done today.
Nice.
But I included a little bit of humor because I always have to do that. But yeah, your badly charred and almost dead avatar is recovered and you wake up in a med bay. So again, you didn't die. You were only mostly dead. You were nearly dead. Someone, blasted your body, but it was recovered. Somebody rescued you and brought you back to a hospital, and the advanced medicine would be able to bring you back. That is a core aspect of the game's design and has been since the beginning. This is also true if you are killed. He doesn't have to put the quotes in this time, but you essentially can infer the same thing. Killed in a boarding action and your teammates can't or don't recover you. If this happens, it is assumed that your dead, quote, body was evacuated into space and then recovered and then brought back to life. You didn't actually die. You would have used a life in this sense in the original Death of a Spaceman, but you didn't actually, have the big die because you were recovered. You're mostly dead, nearly dead. Every death creates wear and tear on your body. Depending on where you were hit and how you died, your character may require a new body part, which can be either cybernetic or organic. Eventually, after too many deaths, your character's body will just give out, and instead of waking up in a med bay, you'll be attending the funeral of your fallen character from the eyes of the beneficiary you specified when originally creating your character. If your old character has done something noteworthy akin to an in-game achievement, his headstone might read, "Here lies Chris, blah, 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 blah." There will also be opportunities to regain some lives or do a reset. These could be through in-game missions, or it could just involve paying a lot of money to a specialist on a remote med planet that is doing stem cell research. So, just like with, and we'll get to regen here, but the idea was, you could you could be a grizzled veteran and have been gravely wounded multiple times, but you get cybernetic limbs and biomechanical organs to put you back together. Essentially, you can be Darth Vadered, but only up to a point. And once too much of you,
Darth
you're
Vader,
too
but
far
not
gone.
General Grievous.
Yeah, you can't be General Grievous, but you can be Darth Vader. That's actually a really good example. Yeah. Everyone who listens to this podcast will be like, "Oh, I get it." Because you can only have your body can only take so much punishment, and that's where the lives come from. But you never actually completely died. You were brought back to life. Same character, you were only mostly dead or nearly dead. So that's the one of the core concepts about the death of a spaceman that most people don't understand. Everybody understands the giving over your inheritance to the next of kin. They understand that death has meaning, and all that, but no one understands that when you have lives, but you have these lives because you didn't actually die. Advanced medicine and theoretical or faked NPC rescue is what brought you back to the hospital. And this didn't go away with regeneration, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the next
And that's
big mention.
why the current implementation is you backspace into a hospital. You don't backspace into the character creator. Like that's the logic behind what you see in game right now is you backspace into this imaginary somebody rescued you, you're in the hospital. Slow down.
Yeah. We have the fake regeneration mechanic in that you set where your respawn bed is, but all of this is not complete. We don't have complete regen because it doesn't take resources or anything like that. We don't have the process of imprinting, which is supposed to cost money, or transferring your imprint. But the big missing gap of it is where if you are, it's one thing if you are in your ship and your ship goes kablooey. Like the last time I died, I took off in my Cutter Rambler and flew right into the hangar doors that I could see were open, but actually weren't because the hangar was desynced with the server. And my ship went kaboom.
That's been happening a lot this patch.
Yeah, and I insta-died. I actually died. I didn't become downed. But when you become downed, if you backspace, rather than waiting for someone, it's not meant you're backspacing and committing suicide. It's meant for you to, I'm going unconscious and I've fired off my beacon and somebody is on the way to, hopefully they'll get to me in time. If you've ever noticed when you die, if you look at your expiration timer, it's really long because it's meant to be there in the, you're not looking at this timer and be like, well, I'm going to bleed out in an hour. I don't want to wait that long. I'm just going to, die and bite my cyanide pill. You're just pressing backspace in order to gamify the process of Cuddy Red showing up, picking you up, and taking you back to the hospital. But because we don't have the complete mechanics or anything like that, there's no separation. Everyone just assumes that this is all regeneration, and it's like, well, that's not actually, that's not the way it's intended, or at least that's not the way it is said to be. It's said to be intended, both in Death of a Spaceman and then forward into reiteration on Death of a Spaceman and regeneration. But let's talk about what was initially said way back when about medical gameplay. And so this comes from the Q&A for the Misk Endeavor, the part 3. There's 3 parts for the Q&A. Greeting citizens. You've got
Back when they
questions,
answer
we've got
questions.
answers. Yes. I mean, at least they do the Q&As, but it's always now, oh, here are the questions we think you're going to ask, or here are the questions we want to answer. Yeah.
It's the basic questions.
Yeah. The ones that always get
No
asked.
longer do we get the
Spectrum thread.
the questions that only nerds ask.
Last week, we kicked off a concept sale for the new Endeavor science ship and its modules. Today, we'll be answering questions collected on the forums. Special thanks to Persistent Universe director Tony Zurovec. So not just random ship designer dude, Tony frickin' Zurovec, for addressing questions about the Endeavor's science and medical mechanics. Enjoy. And that's why he's answering these questions, because they are core gameplay mechanics. And so they wanted the Persistent Universe director to answer questions about them, to be able to speak about what they had in mind. With the Hope class ship, do you see medical as being a complete profession? And this is asked because it wasn't known back then. Now, this is really the introduction for it. The medical profession is one of the more important occupations within Star Citizen, and it's intended to be one of the larger and more flexible roles. On the FPS combat front, medics will be invaluable. They'll be able to perform field triage that can heal some injuries entirely and mitigate others so that the injured party is at least more functional. That's what we have right now, is treating the symptoms. The effects of more serious injuries can often be slowed so that there is a better chance of reaching a hospital where more advanced medical apparatus can improve the chances of survival. That's how deep they want to get with the medical gameplay. It's what we have is very simplified right now. It's a good baseline, but it's definitely not anywhere near where they want it to go. Depending on the cause of death, a well-trained medic can occasionally restart a patient's heart, although death may soon reoccur if the root causes are not quickly addressed. The Hope class Endeavor opens up an entirely, I'm just going to read this next paragraph, range of possibilities for the aspiring healer. As previously noted, Endeavors with an attached medical bay may serve as respawn points for players that have died, and died could be full death, but they're still talking about death of a spaceman. So respawn for when you died, when you went unconscious, you were mostly dead, nearly dead, and you respawned to serve as like being rescued. And the associated hangar bay allows players to, for a price premium, have one of their existing ships or a new purchase delivered quickly so that they can get right back into the action. The greatest demand for Hope class Endeavors will therefore be in those areas where lots of player deaths are occurring, but of course a valuable and unescorted medical ship in a dangerous area will be a tempting target for pirates and other less savory types. In addition to respawn services, an Endeavor has enabled its ID beacon, thus broadcasting, or an Endeavor that has enabled its ID beacon, thus broadcasting to others its position, services offered, prices, and reputation information, can also serve as a field hospital for any player or NPC requiring urgent medical attention. In such cases, the party in need would attempt to quickly close the gap with the Endeavor and then either request access to dock in its landing bay or simply EVA into the external hospital pressure lock. Upon arrival in the hospital, it's up to the Endeavor's crew to employ their expertise to try and save the patient, with the ultimate outcome contributing to their medical reputation. So, medical gameplay is important. The medical profession
That's going to need to
is very
change.
important. What's that?
The outcome of their medical situation having positive or negative reputation on the crew of the Endeavor.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they make the
that means
reputation
if I
part
can
work out.
request docking and get approved for docking and then backspace on their ship, they get negative rep because I did something. That's going to need to change.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of work to make it work appropriately.
Yeah. Big edge case.
Yep.
I cannot wait to see the rework of the Odyssey, the Endeavor. Like, CJ, you have concept artists. I'm sure they're bored. Can we just get a reconcept of it? Like, I don't care if it's like you're gonna have to reconcept it again. I just want to see it.
Yeah. Or
looking
just
at it next to the
remember
Odyssey,
when they
like it's so spindly.
when they made the Orion big and they showed us what it was like next to the old Orion. Just do that.
Just do that.
Put the rumors to rest.
like especially because they like this hanger is supposed to fit two cutlasses, and then they're like, oh, now the cutlasses are like 50% bigger. So like, are we gonna get a hanger that sized?
Mm-hmm. So, along the lines of what we were just talking about in Death of a Spaceman, that original Death of a Spaceman article is from 2013. And so a lot of people that have said like, oh well, this is fine, this is how it needs to be because we need to be able to get back in the action quicker. And Death of a Spaceman, it was never going to work out, and they've abandoned it. Well, I'm pretty sure they didn't, because Death of a Spaceman has been mentioned like 30 times just in Star Citizen shows over the past years. Um, Especially even recently, it has not gone away. They haven't thought about it. They keep on talking about it. But the biggest mention is one that corroborates what we were talking about in the original Death of Spaceman article, where you get rescued. You are downed, and they consider it a death because you can respawn from it, but it isn't you didn't full on die. And that's the thing that they don't communicate well, and a lot of people a lot of gamers have a hard time wrapping their heads around, is that you can die but not die, because they keep calling it death even though it's not death, because it doesn't it doesn't make you have to start a new character, or start from scratch. And so this was Calling All Devs October 30th, 2020. So a little over 3.5 years ago. And this is with Richard frickin' Tyrer and Chris Roberts. Chris Roberts, the author of Death of the Spaceman, and the now number 2 behind Chris Roberts for the company, talking about Death of a Spaceman and how they want to incorporate it. And this is in all their work leading up to 315 in 2021 and the release of Regeneration. But let's see how they describe, and Richard Tyrer describes, the deaths and what respawning means.
To manipulate, dead bodies. But as Chris calls out, death is going to be a really important factor in Star Citizen. Now, death, there's kind of 3 deaths along the spectrum. There's kind of what we're calling like the down state. So that's kind of like when your health has gone to 0 and you're there. And when you're in that scenario,
your health has gone to 0. You are mostly dead, or nearly dead, or you have died, just like Chris Roberts was talking about before.
You'll be able to kind of choose to kind of stay there and be like, okay, I need my buddies to come and rescue me. I need the law enforcement to come and help me, or maybe I've paid for some insurance that rescues my body or something like that.
So law enforcement or EMS, rescue services, they come and rescue you. Either they revive you on site, or like the insurance says, they take you to a hospital and you wake up in a med bay, just like Chris was talking about in 2013. You didn't actually, you didn't die. You didn't, your body, took a lot of damage, but advanced medical science brought you back to life. It brought you back from the brink of death. And again, this is in 2020, so this is a year before Regeneration was released, and you'll see that they're already talking about that. And Regeneration didn't retcon Death of a Spaceman; it just added a little bit to it.
That. Then there is the kind of like you've died in terms of you've given up the ghost. Nobody's coming. You're like, okay, that's it. I'm leaving that body there, and I'm gonna go back to a hospital and be revived. But that's kind of part of your DNA. That DNA is kind of going to be reimpregnated into essentially a clone of you. And then you'll be able to then go back to your location, and you'll be able to see, your dead body there. And as long as nobody's been.
So either first death, where you are downed, and either somebody revives you, or NPCs come and revive you, or your body, you're not dead, but your body's recovered by your insurance. Congratulations, welcome to the American healthcare system. If you call 911 and you're unconscious, and I come and find you, and bring you to the hospital, and keep you alive along the way, and the hospital, prevents you from dying, and you make a recovery, your insurance is going to pay a bill to the to the hospital and to the EMS service. But then The second death is where you are regenerating, and that's what they're talking about with the second death.
In there, you'll be able to retrieve your gear and so on and so forth. And then the third aspect in terms of like you passing on to your next of kin and that kind of thing. So what we're actually evaluating now is kind of how this is integrated into kind of like the core.
Does that make sense? 3 deaths, but the first one you didn't actually die. You were mostly dead. And that's what we have, that part of that right now, where if you are down, someone can come along and revive you. But we don't, and we have the part where if you backspace, you go back to you go back to a hospital bed, but it's not treated any different than if you do the regen, have the regen death and you went kablooey. And we'll see the difference here when we read about regeneration, because that's why regeneration was incorporated into the game, because we needed something to make it so that way you weren't using your because with Death of a Spaceman, if your ship went kaboom, you flew into the sun, you got hit on the forehead with a size 9 torpedo, well, it wouldn't be you wouldn't have more lives to use. You'd go straight to the next of kin portion, and they didn't want that. They didn't want you to not be able to use all your lives because you suffered, you were, something catastrophic happened to you. And so that's why they added the middle layer, that second death of regeneration, where you didn't even get a chance to be downed where you could be rescued, but they didn't want you to skip that and go straight to the full on permadeath part. And the reason, if you can see this on the screen, you can see mixed in with all the Star Citizen videos from our recommendations, you've got classic Sesame Street with Grover, because my son is obsessed with Grover right now. So let's read a little bit about regeneration. So regeneration was introduced a year after that, calling all devs. And we're not going to read the whole thing, because I read the whole thing in my podcast that I did on Saturday, which will be up on my YouTube tomorrow. If you want to know all about regeneration and you have some downtime or listening time at work, listen to the podcast, because I go through all of it, and there's a lot. The whole regeneration article, all 5 of the Lore Makers Community Questions articles where it's heavily mentioned. Grover is definitely cool. I love Grover. Fuck Elmo. Grover's number 1.
Why you gotta be down on Elmo though?
Cookie Monster's the shit too, and so is oh crap. Who's the guy that lives in the garbage can?
Oscar.
Oscar the Grouch. Yep. It's my spirit animal right there.
But why you gotta be down on Elmo though? He has a Twitter. He asks people how they're doing.
Nah, not my thing. Nope.
Wow.
Just gets on my nerves.
There are a couple of there are a couple of just not good Sesame Street neighbors. Not gonna name any names, just they happen to be small, orange, and annoying. Elmo's not one of them. Elmo tries to be kind, like all the time.
And he's annoying. He's terribly annoying.
Sure, but like he tries.
He does try, and he has been very helpful.
Ernie is not annoying. He's a brother.
Mm-hmm.
He's a little brother to literally everyone he hates.
When people say regeneration replaced Death of a Spaceman or retcon Death of a Spaceman, it really didn't, because they talk about it right here and how important it is and how it hasn't gone away. And they reference the video we just watched a bit of right here in the regeneration article. But they realize that with Death of a Spaceman and the way Star Citizen is, that even with all the mechanics to prevent you from dying instantaneously, it was still going to happen. And so that's why they brought in regeneration and that second death. So they're talking about Alpha 315 bringing in healing tier 0. To coincide with this brand new gameplay, the narrative team has been working on some brand new lore. While we always knew that medical science would be advanced enough to bring you back from the brink of death, there we are again. Advanced medical science bringing you back from the brink of death. Mostly dead, nearly dead. Death, in quotations. It was during the recent development period that it was decided that players would benefit from being able to come back even if their avatar's body was completely lost, aka ship go kablooey, or your body gets hit by a size 9 torpedo and there's no conceivable way for it to have been recovered. And that's something that like they almost said verbatim when they did the regeneration elaboration Star Citizen Live, I think it was, or was it a Calling All Devs? I forget. While a lot of scenarios could have been explained away by diligent NPC emergency response teams finding injured players and bringing them back to civilization, just like they talked about in Death of a Spaceman, where your body is recovered, your mostly dead body is recovered, just how Richard Tyler was talking about, where law enforcement or your insurance recovers your body and you wake up in a med bay. That's the first death. There were a lot of cases where even the bravest ambulance pilots wouldn't have been able to retrieve you. Imagine a bold explorer flying themselves directly into the sun, or some friendly outlaws firing a size 9 torpedo directly at your head. Speaking of which, I've changed Blizzrad's nickname to Friendly Outlaw because of his obsession with torpedoes. But that's... Nice. This is what they're talking about. This is what regen's for. Regen isn't for you've been downed and you're just going to backspace because you don't want to wait. Regen is for when you are insta-dead. Nothing more. That's it. Those catastrophic injuries that it isn't conceivable that an ambulance came and rescued you. But they say that. What ambulance is going to rescue you from that? Well, we could have declared those instances to be permadeaths and forced the player to hand off everything to their next of kin. We were worried about how punishing this would be for people new to playing the game. So that's why they added this. They didn't add this to replace that first death where you are down. This isn't meant to replace you being downed and waiting for rescue or being rescued by NPC medevac. This is in addition to. This is meant for. This is only brought into play in the cases of catastrophic death where your body can't be recovered. And that's why people are up in arms about the Ursa Medevac commercial. So we're going to watch this real quick, and then we're going to talk about a few things that will really change the game for medical players and medical gameplay in the future. But having this context that we just talked about with these different sources and what they're going for, this context that most people are completely unaware of or only marginally aware of, watch this video with that context and tell me what you think, in chat. If you're watching this later, let me know in the comments. There's a reason I gave this a thumbs down.
You're probably thinking I'm a goner. But the thing is, I've died 1,000 times. Because a regen has always been the strategy. Let's do this. One more time.
So no, it has not always been the strategy. Because we just read how it hasn't always been the strategy. And if you watch my podcast from Saturday, or you were there and listening, or you check it out tomorrow while you're at work, and you listen to all the lore that they put out since this article, and there's a lot to preface what regen means and why all this wouldn't be a thing at all, you'll understand why the people are very upset about the potential for medical gameplay and how they have concerns about regeneration, the second death supplanting the first death. Now the issue is right now people don't want to wait for someone to answer their beacon, and just like how in the Endeavor Q&A, we don't have any of the reputation stuff that would allow for people answering the beacon to decide whether they want to answer that person's beacon, while risk the ambush. It's an incomplete mechanic, and we only have 100-player servers. You have a massive play space and 100-player servers, and even if somebody accepts your beacon, they can do it from across the system and not be there for a while. Or even if they're in orbit, it can take a while for them to get there. And so the beacon system is very broken and incomplete. And so the medical system is great if you play with others, but if there's no one there to revive you conveniently, then yeah, you're going to just regenerate, and go respawn. And that's why people think, oh, this super convenient respawn will supplant medical gameplay, because who's going to use a medical beacon when they can just regen? Even if regen's punishing, players are going to take the expensive route rather than wait for a long period of time. Well, that's not going to be an issue in the not too distant future. And why is that? Because of server meshing. One of the main mitigating factors for the need for a cheap regeneration mechanic, for super convenient regeneration, is the fact that server meshing is coming in. Now, granted, like Naz and I were talking about earlier, something just broke.
Nah, it's fine.
We're only getting static server meshing first. But even in that static server meshing, in these static server meshing tests, they went up to 800 players in Stanton. Now, it didn't work very well, but that was just in the first tests. And so maybe, by the first release, they'll have that many players in a server. Maybe not. Maybe it'll only be 400. But imagine how much that changes the game for beacons if you have 4 times as many people in a server. How much quicker somebody can get to you. Imagine how much that changes if you have that plus the reputation system to allow for being able to know what kind of person is putting out the beacon and who's responding to that beacon. The guy who was doing the bunker was getting paid $20K. The medical rescuer has to fight his way and only gets $15K. And that's the problem is you get paid a certain amount, and it's not based off of insurance. Because like if you call an ambulance, your copay is only a few $100s usually, or maybe $1,000 or $2,000, but the actual bill to your insurance is an order of magnitude above that. And that's what should be going to somebody answering your beacon. Beacons should pay really well, but they don't, because it comes out of the person paying it. It isn't an insurance system where it costs the guy $1,000 for the beacon, and that's his copay for his insurance. And that's part of the problem, is we don't have that to make beacons cost effective for players to put out. And so,
but there also needs to be a way that the game is able to understand that someone's not gaming the system. Like, let's say it's just $1 million to res somebody, and when they throw up a beacon, okay, so I pull out my gun, shoot the guy next to me, wait for him to throw up a beacon, grab the beacon, and get $1 million.
Yeah. You have to be able to balance it and make it so that people can't cheese it.
Which takes time. It takes a lot of dead time for that kind of stuff.
Well, and it can't be like a crap ton of money. but it needs to be more for it to be worth it. But it also needs to be scaled to, it needs to scale to the amount of risk and then the level of care you provide. If you show up and all you do is hit them with a med pen, you get a base charge. But if it's, you're coming up, it, that there's a lot of different ways to balance it in terms of, how far away someone has to be. You can only be, the beacon only goes out to people within the Crusader planetary system if you're on Cellin. And that way they can't be too far away. And that way it, mitigates how far away they're coming from, so what their fuel costs are. But it also, you can have like an incentive system that says, if you show up with a tier 3 bed and you just hit them with, or you just hit them with a med pen, or based off what you do for them, it adds on to the bill. But maybe it doesn't come out of that person's account. Part of it does, but a lot of it comes out of the insurance. That's just an idea. But even with more players in a server, you'll have addressed a lot of the issue with medical beacons. Now, the other aspect of, and before we continue on with that, but the other aspect, and it's related to server meshing, is with server meshing, not only can you increase player counts, but you can increase NPCs. You can increase the number of NPCs, and you improve their functionality with higher server FPS. Yeah, Pyromedical Beacon rewards is not getting a bullet and you pay them $15K. Yeah, and that's the other thing, is all of this will have to scale, because just as a real life example, but it works. Me on the ambulance in Boise where I live, the ambulance bill for me to come and treat you, do what we call a treat in place, or where I treat you and you go back, you continue about your day, or to do a treat and transport where I take you to the hospital, is far different than if some professional global medical support company flies a medical team to you in Tanzania to treat you and take care of your injuries, and then allow you to continue on your safari, or brings you back to the United States for surgery. But those companies exist, and they talk about them in the lore, in the Lore Makers Community Questions. I read about them on Saturday. They're ubiquitous across Star Citizen space because they want medical gameplay to be important, but it's not just players, it's NPCs. If you like Tavaran, there's Rajora Rescue, which is a Tavaran volunteer organization that does that specifically, servicing only Tavarans, and their various diasporas. Yeah, but that's server meshing alone.
Kind of sucks not to be a Tavaran.
Yeah, but that's just one example. There's lots of them. But server meshing alone would help open up doors for CIG to really mitigate the need for, in the pretty near future, and then more so going into dynamic server meshing, but mitigate the need for easy access to regen, by having it so that way, if you are downed, you have much more easy access to being revived, because you could have more NPC, you can have more reliable NPCs that could do it. And that's one of the things I talk about in my video that I'm doing is, the fix for this is NPCs. If you don't want to wait for a player, because obviously it takes time for players to, come down from orbit and land on the surface and walk down to you. If you don't want to wait for a player, they can fake it with NPCs, because NPCs will outnumber us 10 to 1 anyway. They can fake it with NPCs, and NPCs can spawn out of spawn closets or land anywhere on a planet where there isn't a spawn closet and provide you medical support, whether it's just a med pen revive, or they fake it and you fade to black, and they fake it because a Cutlass Black landed near you and whisked you away to the clinic of your choice. But that's what we need. We don't need just easy backspace, the backspace express. But server meshing is a big portion of the answer for a robust medical gameplay system, and having medical beacons work, as well as not just medical beacons, but you put out a beacon before you get injured, and saying you need medical support, or when we have higher tier med beds and they do stuff, Say the Apollo comes out or whatever, putting out a beacon for healing. You can be completing your bunker mission and say, okay, I've got a tier 2 injury and I've treated myself with my med gun to mitigate the symptoms and allow for me to continue on with the mission. But we only have an Anvil C8R outside. I don't want to have to go all the way back to the station or a city to get healed. I'll put out a beacon saying I need a tier 2 med bed to come to me at this location. And while you're finishing the mission, they show up and they land outside, and you go outside and you get healed, and you get paid for that. But that's the other part of where it needs to go. But the biggest hurdle to all this is server meshing. And I'm not going to watch. We're not going to watch these, but I just want to remind everyone that these videos exist. If you wanted to learn more about those server meshing tests and how things went and what sort of performance they were getting at what scale in the initial tests, check out 1042's videos. On it, he did a visual guide of all the different configurations they did, or based off of what he was able to discern, as well as a server meshing performance video. So go check these out. The links to both of these will be in the show notes in the description below if you're watching this later on YouTube or you want to check it out later. Yeah, they probably socially confused. I actually said, and I don't know if you were there, but I actually joked about that as a conspiracy theory regarding our Imperator. I think our Imperator is in league with Bioticore and the companies making the imprint scanners and the Ibrahim spheres and all that. And the reason she funneled all this government money into the projects was to make them ubiquitous and to send their stock skyrocketing and dramatically increase their revenues. Because talk about a get rich scheme, yeah. Oh man, if you knew about this, if you worked in government, and you knew about this before it made it public. Woo! What's that called again? Insider trading? Yeah.
Corruption, bribery, racketeering.
Okay. So, and this is the next part. Oh, that's why. This is the next aspect of what will make another aspect of what will make medical gameplay interesting and dynamic is the dynamic universe, the quantum simulation. Now, when? We don't know. But
1.0.
Yeah. One of the things is, let's see. Where'd it go? So with quantum is what will allow for them to not fake what we were just talking about with the medical beacons. Because in the interim, they can fake NPCs arriving. They can make that time to arrival a static time. They can make it so that way. Okay, well, NPCs. If you want an on-site NPC revive, they come out of a spawn closet, trauma team like, and they come up to you and hit you with a med pen, and they could say, okay, well, their ETA is 2 minutes. You're on a bunker on Hurston or something like that. And they can fake that and just have those mechanics work because they have spawn closets. The NPCs revive each other right now in game. They come up and they hit each other with med pens and go back to work, even though you're just sitting there dead and downed. But the way they go, and the same thing for if you are doing a medical beacon for an NPC mission to go and do a rescue mission, which we'll look at here in a second, in order to not fake those like they do some of the other beacons right now. That's what quantum is all about. And so they'd be able to, you put out your beacon saying, I need medical support. And, you could say, okay, I don't want to wait for, you put it out there and then you see what the ETA is, for these different people, like how far away, based off of, okay, a 4.5 or higher rating and within 2 million kilometers or something like that. And you see how many people are available, and how far away they are, in the UI. And then you compare that, and the cost for that versus the cost for an NPC to be there however much sooner. And that's how you would really balance it. Is it would cost you a lot more to have an NPC sooner because there's more of them, but a player could be a lot cheaper, but it might take you a little longer. But that's how the beacon system would work with Quantum, is allowing you to see that information, in order to do a cost comparison rather than just, you put out your beacon and then you just say, I'm going to just go with the NPCs because I want the short one or I want the cheap one, and then I just wait.
Click there, and you actually see, let's go ahead and back out a little bit and find there's a contract to the right. You have access to missions, so you can see that Clipsos Norwang is requesting personal transport to Lorville, and he's
Yeah, so people already use beacons for transport. They don't use them very often, but they do use them. And people are mostly willing to wait a lot of the time because they don't want to backspace. They don't want to lose their gear and everything. But a lot of people will backspace because they don't want to wait for a long time because there's so few people doing medical. Well, if there's more people doing medical, they won't backspace. They'll use their beacon. They'll be able to keep their gear because they can either get revived on site, or you could get in you get revived on site, or you get healed on site, or they take you to the hospital. You say, okay, well, I'm coming in a Cutlass Red with a tier 3 bed, but we'll get you up. You can get your tier 3 injury taken care of, and we'll take you to this station with a tier 2 bed, or we'll take you to Orison General with a tier 1 bed, whichever one you want, and it costs X amount. And that would be up to the player, but that way you're not losing your gear, because right now with regen, you lose all your gear. And if you substantially reduce the time that negatively impacts players' gameplay, while also allowing them to keep their gear, they'll use it more often. And Quantum is what would what would take it from being faked to real, both on the player-generated mission, as well as NPC-generated mission side. Because they have that, let's see,
is no different than players would. In other words, you see a lot of deaths on a route that's got a lot of value. And go ahead and hover over some of those contracts. These are contracts that are being thrown out by the NPCs on that route. What's happening is,
so you have contracts being thrown out by NPCs on this route for, hey, I'm under attack and they need support. Well, you would also have those same contracts for NPCs in need of rescue. Hey, my ship has been, I've been hit by pirates and I'm injured and my ship is disabled and I need rescue. Well, that's the missions that Quantum would generate. Now they can they can create those missions now. They've been working on those missions. We'll look at that in a second. They've done work on those missions. They just don't have all of the mechanics to be able to put them into game. But this is what we can look forward to as people interested in medical gameplay, is not only answering player beacons, and whether it's just doing a simple revive, treating on site, treating transport, what have you, but also doing NPC missions, and whether they're out in space or on the planet, those missions could be put into the game, in the not too distant future without Quantum, but be made that much more dynamic by Quantum in the future. And so here's the deliverable for rescue transport missions on the progress tracker. Now, obviously, they haven't done any work on these in a long time, but the work for these started almost all the way back to when the progress trackers, first started. And they've done a lot of work all the way up through nearly the end of 2022 before they stopped working on it, because they realized that they didn't have what they needed to get these missions into game yet. But we're getting closer. And with server meshing and better NPC performance and NPCs having more behaviors and other things working, I think we'll probably see work resume on these missions, because we need more medical gameplay, and we need more for these people with these medical ships to do. So it says taking advantage of AI follow behaviors, which is something that they have worked on in the monthly reports extensively and is a big part of Squadron 42. And it's something that they will have to get into the PU in the not too distant future after bringing it over from Squadron. To create missions where players transport customers from one location to another, along with prototype missions where players must rescue imperiled clients from dangerous situations and escort them to safety. And this could totally include medical treatment for these rescue missions, because you could go to this rescue mission and find a downed NPC who needs to be revived, or a mostly dead NPC who you then bring on your med bed and then have to provide treatment to. And then they stay on the med bed, and then you move them over to a gurney and you bring them to the hangar and you push them into the hospital elevator that is already in the game. You know, a lot of the aspects of these missions are already available in game. They just need a few more things to really tie it all together to make it work. And then on top of that, add quantum to make it work dynamically, just like the other missions, you know, to not fake it, but to have it be really meaningful. And so a lot of those things came out in 2021, you know, to over 2.5, going on 3 years ago. And as you can see here, we have the emergency drop-offs. We have the ability for players to go onto these gurneys, and we really need the ability to move NPCs onto these gurneys, but to push them into here and then drop them off. This functions the exact same way almost in terms of game logic as the freight elevator or the little package drop-off containers. You put your NPC in here, you put the player in here, you drop them off, and you get mission complete and you get paid. And we have a lot of the other mechanics there. They just need to come back around to bring that in. But you also could be able to get paid for doing treatments with your med bed. You get paid for doing treatments for using your paramed device for treating symptoms, which essentially is what I do nowadays. But even before expanding on medical gameplay, going to medical gameplay tier 1, there's a lot of ways where they could incorporate what we have with other aspects of the game that have been introduced to really wrap up these missions, to give people interested in medical gameplay more to do, rather than it's not PvP content in more of its player with player content, because you're providing medical support to other players, whether it's in a PvP or a PvE scenario. The other major aspects that are really going to change medical gameplay is reducing the incidence of us suffering the big die. And if I say big die comically because if you listen or read the Galaxy's Edge book series, and it's not Star Wars, it's its own thing. There are these frog people called the Coobs, and they always say the big die, when you full on die. But in 3.18, CIG was finally able to incorporate soft death, and it's supposed to work 60 to 70% of the time. Where if a component takes critical damage, your ship doesn't blow up, but it remains intact, and it's just disabled. Well, instead of your ship blowing up with you in it, now you are stuck on your derelict ship. You are in need of rescue. And we have fire coming. And all these other things. If there's a fire on your ship and your ship is disabled, you could get burned by fire. You might take
not to mention
injuries.
Using your oxygen that's not regenerating.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you have a lot of different reasons that you need rescue, and you could just backspace, but we will have server meshing on top of soft death, and we will also have resource management coming in on top of soft death. So a lot of the times where we suffer the big die, where you go straight to regeneration, those will go away. and instead you will be in need of rescue, and you could potentially have injuries where you need healing, and you'll have more players in a server available to do these rescues, and a lot better mechanics to do it with. And the other thing that they're working on, and this is from the March monthly report, but they continue that work in April, but this is the statement I was looking for. A temporary solution for ship hull penetration was added until Maelstrom is ready to support physical ship armor. Because that's the other aspect of it is people say, well, I'm in a fighter. My ship's always just going to go kablooey. No. Maelstrom is there to make it so that way, Maelstrom along with resource management, so that way even your smaller ships won't just disintegrate and kill you instantly. They can make it so that way the cockpit of your ship is damn near invulnerable, and you as the character can't
Plus-
die.
The aforementioned eject before you actually die.
Yeah, exactly. You can eject, they can make it, but just like in real life, where the cockpit of aircraft, combat aircraft, is heavily armored, same thing. They can use Maelstrom to make it so that way, not only do your big ships take a lot longer to die, they have an increased time to kill, and much more likelihood to be disabled. But also even your fighters, if you're in fighter combat, your ship will, you lose your wings and your engines, and it'll just sit there, and they can make it so that way it's very difficult for a player. It's cost prohibitive for a player to blow up your cockpit because it'll require so much more ammo. But you're disabled. Your ship is done, but you're still in your cockpit and you've survived, or you've ejected in order to try and get away. Or you eject from your cockpit when you're ready for rescue. But that's a big way where they could make it so that way you don't insta-die, and instead you need rescue, and it removes the need for removes a huge need for regeneration that we use consistently now. At least I know I do. The majority of my actual deaths are from my ship going kablooey, and it's mostly due to bugs in the game. Your invisible derelict ship, your invisible asteroids, your invisible hangar doors. But even those things would be impacted by Maelstrom and resource management. The ship will become disabled. You won't go kablooey. You won't regenerate. And you'll be stuck. And you'll be in need of rescue. And then the consequences, well, it's like, well, my stuff is here. My ship could be repaired. I'm not going to backspace because someone can come and get me in a matter of minutes because we have 1,000 people in the server now or more. The last bit, and this is the last thing that I wanted to mention in terms of factors that are going to really change medical gameplay in the future and really mitigate the need for easy access to regeneration. And this was introduced in Alpha 3.22. So, along with weapon balance changes, we have adjusted player health, damage modifiers, and medical to increase time to kill. Damage modifiers have been adjusted to allow for more consistent firefights and times. Removed increased stamina costs on limb HP pools being low. Removed movement speed penalty on limb HP pools being low. Medical pens will now fully heal players. This is overall the first, it's the key word, major pass towards a new time to kill goal. The FPS team is eager to hear feedback about how you feel about the current values. They want time to kill to be longer. And as I don't know if you've played, the new co-op shooter, extraction shooter, Northern Trooper's been playing it with me.
Not.
I haven't been playing it with him yet, but I played it with Treesan and a bunch of other people. Loads of fun. Has a great medical system, and has a really good long time to kill.
Grey Warfare thing?
Yeah, Grey Warfare. Thank you very much. It has a great medical. Yeah, I've only played the PvE just because I'm just not a PvP guy, but PvE is a ton of fun.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but they have really.
I think the changes listed are I know they're specifically to achieve a number, but like you've removed like all the nuances.
Yeah, they will have to
Like no more does it
reincorporate
remove
nuance.
movement speed. It doesn't remove stamina. Now you got one button heals. Like I have to like remember not to freak out. Like you've just removed everything.
Well, they removed
They've gamified it.
they removed the modifiers related to health, and they added they've made it so you become injured much more often. And so it's not a health thing, it's a have you suffered an injury or not. And that's the big thing is if it was just associated with health, then you could just keep on hitting the med pens and it would go away. But if it's associated with the injuries, you can't do any. The only thing you can do is use the right medication, either the right pen or the right treatment from your paramed device, or go get healed. And that's the thing that they want is they want you to not not even be downed as easily, but especially they don't want you to big die easily. But they want you to continue to stack injuries until you become combat ineffective, and you are all but forced to go back and get healed. Because the more injuries you have, the easier it is for you, and the more severe those injuries are, the more easy it is for your blood drug level to get to the point where you just overdose and you can't mitigate those symptoms anymore. So you can't be combat effective. And so this time to kill goal, along with incorporating more injuries, is specifically in order to encourage people and all but push them into using medical gameplay. Instead of just running around with med pens, you need a medic with a paramed device to keep you going because you're going to get these injuries and you can't just med pen your way out of it. You have to, scan them with the paramed device and apply the right treatment, which mitigates the symptoms for a period of time, but it's only going to last for so long because you have to keep on treating them and blood drug level go up, especially as you continue to take more injuries. And so it's I can
imagine a lot of the recent medical change will all but be reverted specifically when they are ready to do another pass on medical.
Oh yeah.
To do another one, like even these passes, like, hey, we need like specific data on medical.
Yeah.
Right now,
what they're doing is
just get people back in the game.
They're doing with it. That's why I think that the tier 3 regen thing will go away. And I even think that tier 2 regen could go away. Because if they are able to incorporate the things that we talked about within, with server meshing and higher player counts, higher NPC counts, NPC rescue, which is when they say that regen was always the strategy,
it might not
I'm
even
like,
necessarily
no, NPC
to go away. Like,
I just think
once they go through all the things that you've talked about today, like it's gonna be so rare for someone to actually die. And like, imagine you go through all of your almost deaths, and you're at your big death, or well, not almost death, but you go through all your first deaths, and you're at a second death where you're like really dead. You're not gonna want to wake up at a nurse.
Yeah, but that's the thing is I think it's an unnecessary thing to have to balance. If you just remove it, you don't have to balance it now, and you're just making it so that way people will use the medical system. But if you don't want to rely on players, just make the NPC rescue either on, because that's the big thing is a lot of people just want to be revived on site, and just make it so NPCs can hit you with a med pen, and they either spawn from a spawn closet, or if you're out in the forest, a Cuddy Red lands next to you, a minute or two later, and outruns a medic or two, and they come up and they jab you, and they say, "Do you need anything else?" And you're like, "No, I'm good. I'm going to keep going." Or yes, you go get into the ambulance, and you use the UI to tell you, they take you to whatever station, and you go into the drop off point, and you wake up in the clinic. And it's super short, because it's like, that's the thing is if you have a bunch of injuries and you don't have a paramed device, or you can't continue because you have so many injuries, you can't treat them without becoming overdosed, then okay, well, why backspace if you lose your gear when you can just call for an NPC ambulance? The NPC ambulance will be there in a minute or two, and they can take you to the nearest station, which is a minute or two away. They land in a hangar. You're fully healed in 5-10 minutes, versus if you regen, you
It'd be a
lose everything,
great,
and you still have the injury,
great
you
way
still
to
have the
maybe
trauma
stop
echoes.
them. Yeah, a great way to maybe stop them would be to make death or backspacing remove missions.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Well,
you abandoned here, or you are in need of medical attention. We'll just say it took too long for you to do the mission. Just get out of here.
yeah. Well, and that very well could be a thing, because one of the core side effects of regeneration is memory loss. Memory loss, confusion, and headaches. And that's why I'm like, I really don't think it's needed, because if you have a robust NPC, if you have a players, a lot more players to do it, but be a robust NPC rescue system. If you're downed, because you didn't die because they're getting away from the big die. If you're downed and you just call for a revive and that's all you want, that's great. But you can the UI in the down state could say, you could literally pick and choose and say, okay, I have a tier 1 injury. I want to complete this mission. I don't want to go back to the station. I want to pay extra to have an Apollo show up and treat my tier 1 injury. Or that price tag is way too steep for this mission. I'm just going to take the Cuddy Red ambulance ride back to the station, or back to the hospital and get this injury treated, because that's an extra zero I can't afford.
Yeah.
And you will use that every time over just regenning and losing your gear, having to go find your body, dealing with the symptoms, the negative symptoms of regen, and having lost one of your second lives, because your second lives from regen, that's a limited number too. And so if you make the proposition of using the medical gameplay, both via player or NPC, whichever you so choose, more appealing, it removes the reason for someone to want to regen, and it allows regen to be what it was always meant to be, just for the catastrophic death. But and removes work for CIG for having to freaking balance it, because that would be a nightmare. But it also removes it from a lore perspective, because if people are using the medical system as they've always wanted you to use the medical system, because we have advanced medical technology, and the regen lore talks about how no one would ever use regen as an out because of the negative side effects and the risks associated with it, then it cements that lore in, and it would mean that they would never give regen beds, or they would never put regen technology into tier 3 and tier 2 beds. They would only concentrate it into tier 1 beds, which you would have at major faction locations, hospitals, at major stations and landing zones. And that way you're only having to go back to your regen location at a major landing zone or a major station if you get hit by a torpedo in the forehead, or you do something crazy like fly your ship into the sun. Because CIG have effectively eliminated all those all those bug and edge cases where you suffered the big die, and then replaced it instead with in need of rescue because you're in a down state or your ship's been disabled, and what have you. And I think that's a much better and more elegant solution than than watering down regeneration to say that, oh yeah, it's available on a freaking ground ambulance, and everywhere else, and then having to try and balance that against having a robust medical gameplay system for players like you've always promised and like you've sold. Because that's the other part that I mentioned in my video. They sold a lot of medical ships, and they sold a lot of ships advertising that they had med bays. And to just say
I
that,
think-
oh, well, regen's ubiquitous, I think that's a minefield.
I really do think like, and not unjustly, that people have taken the medevac ad a little too far. I do really think those ship ads now need to come with little disclaimers, like not indicative of actual gameplay, because like literally in the text of, like, in the lines of the ad, not implied, not skirted around, in the actual words said in the ad, they do go directly against everything we've had here, we've talked about.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, it's not
Eh.
just it's up to interpretation. It's like, no, he literally, like, that is not supposed to be a
yeah,
thing. You know,
right.
100% not supposed to be a thing. And
Like they,
yeah,
and I think they think it's obvious that the trailers are not trailers for gameplay. They are trailers in lore to sell the ships in lore, but it's not obvious. It's not that obvious.
no player or backer is going to be able to make that distinction. You know, and unless you say it point blank, and that's the problem. Is it's by doing that, it becomes very nebulous what the actual intent is and what the actual mechanic is meant to be. And this one takes it a lot further, because I mean, if you compare this to the Firebird commercial just shows it shooting its missiles and flying fast. Okay, that's pretty indicative of what the damn thing can do. You know, but this is saying this is contradicting a crap ton
Like
of
the
lore
biggest thing you can poke at the
and a crap
Firebird
ton of
commercial
years
is
of
probably its
design.
maneuverability.
Yeah.
I bet you the
It does.
Firebird's not that maneuverable, because every ship they show flying has way more maneuverability in the trailer.
Yeah. Well, and they do say on the ship page, they talk about its straight line speed too. And so I feel like that's a little bit more honest than that's a really good pilot, you know, thing. Yeah. But yeah, I do think that the concerns regarding what's going on, what the changes in 323.1 and the subsequent poorly timed and poorly worded Ursa medevac commercial, I think those concerns are very valid. But at the same time, I do think we still have a lot to look forward to for medical gameplay. I don't think that it's dead, but I do think that CIG, if they stay the course of regen on lower tier beds and giving more access to regen rather than using the medical gameplay system and NPC rescue, I think it's going to make their lives more difficult in terms of trying to balance it. And I think it's going to
Not only
water
that,
down
it
the
also
experience.
gives them, it really, it makes it a lot more gamified. It makes it a lot cheaper of an experience. It makes it not what a lot of people were here for, and it sets a terrible precedent for stuff to come, that like we expected this in-depth mechanic to be able to take our time, and it's just press button.
Yeah.
Done.
Press button to backspace, you know, and I'll worry about the cost later. Or the other thing is that if it's costly, there will be negative symptoms and other things that they can do actor status wise. But if it's costly, well, then you've disadvantaged people who don't know life the game. People who know life the game will just pay the cost, you know, and deal with the symptoms. But then the people who don't know life the game and can't afford it, you know, will struggle to afford the cost of regen. Or, you know, on the flip side, if you don't make it costly enough, then everybody will just abuse it and they won't use the medical gameplay system, you know, or at least not as much as
It
they
needs to
should.
be cost, not in like money, and not in things you can obtain.
Yeah.
But in in ways that the game moves around your character. Because just making it like a big price tag, like you're right, it's will add to elite, just be elitism. But like if it's more of you got into a rough spot, you're gonna take a loss on this, not just money wise, but like your stuff, the mission you were doing, like getting back to the location is gonna take some time. Like if you put all those together, that's a decent cost. But if you only had the amount of like, let's say an hour to play a week, then you kind of have two options. Either you're going to get good at whatever kind of combat you were in that put you in that scenario, which is going to take a long time because you only got an hour a week, or you're going to play a safer option. This is kind of the outcome of Star Citizen. They want you to say, hey, I want to play safer because I don't want to die. They would love for the game to actually force players to play safe.
Yeah,
Because
play
the
safe
game is
or
brutal.
plan enough to accept that risk by bringing medics and bringing the appropriately equipped ships to mitigate that. And the other thing is, this was done because the experience is pretty brutal, because we do die a lot to stupid shit.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, and it's why it's a valid thing right now. Not marketed appropriately, but it is a valid thing right now, and I totally get it, and it makes sense. But if your goal is to make the experience not overly brutal, that's why we need NPC rescue. Because if people are backspacing from downstate because they're playing by themselves and they don't want to wait for another player, then you really just the way to do that is to incorporate the medical system, which is NPC rescue. It doesn't have to be player rescue. It's just NPC rescue. NPC comes, trauma team comes out of spawn closet. They lay down covering fire. Medic comes over, jabs you with a med pen. They go back in the spot closet. You have your gear. You continue your mission. That took less than 2 minutes. Which would be 1,000 times more appealing than waking up in your Ursa and having to come all the way back down into the bunker, what have you. And
I mean,
if you, and the other thing is, if you're, if you're out on a planet, they do it with the Cuddy Red reinforcements and they bring a medic. But then the other thing is, if you don't want to continue the mission because you have injuries and you don't think you can continue, you just have a different set of UI that says, okay, I want them to rescue me, and you wake up in a med bed, and it's just assumed that that trauma team came and dragged you through the elevator or through the field into their Cuddy Red, and they brought you back to the hospital. And that would be the same as regeneration, on one hand, but you kept your gear.
Yeah. Like on one hand, it makes the game feel very cheap, but on the other hand, the game's not ready for it. But on the other hand, there was no caveat either for the trailer or for the announcement that they're adding respawn to tier 3 beds. They did say, because we want to make the thing less brutal, but that's not a caveat. That's because the game is the way it is. We're doing this thing that will make the game the way it is. There was no words to say it was a temporary fix, no words to say that it was something they're doing in the interim while we work on other features. It was just, because the game's hard, we're going to put this in.
Yeah.
No caveats.
Yeah, they said that we'll continue to look at it in the future, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's really vague. And when you're doing all this, you have to provide more reassurance to the players who want to do medical gameplay, I'm sorry, you did promise right here. The medical profession is one of the most important occupations within Star Citizen and is intended to be one of the larger and more flexible roles. You sold this. Yeah. And you need to reassure players that this will still be a thing.
If people want to get on CIG for coming up with marketing crap to sell ships, that's flying in the face of all the crap they sold with this ship.
This ship, the Apollo, the Galaxy, the Cutlass Red, the Anvil C8R. Like, there's a good number of
Like it doesn't make sense. It's not a marketing thing.
yeah, having a med bay as a
Because
feature
if it was
on
marketing,
your Odyssey,
that would be a marketing thing.
your Carrack, which that's what most people use the Carrack for, is the fact that it's a tier
Well, that's
2
because
bed.
like the other stuff just doesn't work.
The,
Like there's nothing
the
to
Idris,
do on the Carrack except for the
the
hospital.
Polaris, like, yeah, and those are features that are advertised for those ships because that's an important feature because medical is meant to be important, and we're supposed to be using the medical system, not just backspacing. And so this is a problem of CIG's own making, and I don't think that they're taking the right route to do this while also making the game a bit more approachable. And I think that by doing the NPC thing, they can make the game less punishing and more approachable while also not wasting people's time in a way that's more believable. Because I don't want to wait 30 minutes for somebody to come and get me either. No one wants that. Not everybody can, play with friends all the time. I play solo quite a bit, but
Yep, same.
that's where they need to go with it in order for it to be a win-win for everybody, as well as a win-win for CIG for not having to balance the crap out of that shit. But yeah, as you just said in the PM, that's what that was about. And I was actually meaning to do the same thing because it's midnight here. But that is all that we have for this evening.
Here.